Yeah, let's just touch on your thoughts. You touched on a little bit about we need to make this. We won't vote for like the reconciliation package. Talk about leverage a little bit for folks.
Yeah, so I mean, this is the perennial debate in, I think, progressive circles about what is enough to get in a package, and when do we say, okay, we're going to vote for something anyway, even if it doesn't have all of our priorities in it. Right now, progressives in Congress have a significant amount of leverage because the Democratic majority is small. So today, I don't know if you guys saw this because it happened relatively recently today, but Kirsten Sinema made some comments along the lines of, I won't necessarily support the $3.5 trillion spending number in reconciliation. And the reaction to that in Democratic circles a lot of the time is, like we got to figure out some way to convince Kirsten Sinema or pressure Kirsten Sinema around this, or we just have to do what she wants. Democratic leadership does not feel that way about progressives. And part of that is because I think they rightly understand that there are many progressives who will say at the end of the day, if I'm going to get $2 trillion and it's got stuff that's going to help people, like that's better than nothing. And I need to try to help people now because people are suffering. I get that. But it's also because progressives don't exercise their leverage and take stands on issues and say non-negotiable, you need to go back and you need to get Manchin and Sinema to agree to this. I don't care how you do it, but figure out a way to do it because this is the right thing. You say you support it and we're not budging. So you will not pass a reconciliation bill if you don't have a Medicare expansion in there. Sorry. And progressives, I don't think, ever do that enough. They have the ability to do that, but a lot of times what you'll see, and you saw this when this $3.5 trillion number came out, generally the progressives in Congress said, this would be the biggest investment in history, having a $3.5 trillion investment. It's great to have this investment. And I get where they're coming from to some extent, but I'm like, if you're saying that, you're taking all of your power away because Bernie had $6 trillion in his original bill. $3.5 trillion is it's a bare compromise, and it doesn't have still some of the priorities that you should be insistent upon. And what I want to know, if progressives are going to keep saying that sort of message, this is a great investment, what did leadership oppose that progressives got in there? Because Biden, again, says he supports this stuff. So if you can really show me some things where it's clear that Democratic leadership is against this stuff and progressives got it in there, I might be open to hearing, okay, you've exercised all of your leverage and pulled out all the stops to get stuff. But what we know publicly is that Democratic leadership ostensibly supports all of this stuff. So unless you start taking a stand on some of the stuff they don't support or that Manchin and Sinema oppose, you're not exercising your power.
Yeah, go ahead, David.
Oh, I mean, I was just going to add to that, especially after a 2020 campaign season where the kind of message from the Democratic Party leadership and from Joe Biden was that, the progressives, they want a lot of stuff, but it actually is not that far away from what we would like to do. And we just have this very moderate one right and now. We're again in the middle of this pandemic. There's a lot of momentum and who knows what's going to happen in 2022. To make them go on the record on these things and be like, okay, well, we were scared of, expanding, Medicare, doing all these things. I think, is 100% something that you could be really hitting them on in a material way.
Right. I mean, and we talked about this in terms of the public opinion, but there's a huge constituency of people, even Republican voters, who want this stuff. So if you were willing to make it a hill that you can die on and people organize around it, you can exert a lot of pressure on this stuff. I do think that one thing that Democrats should do more of, and again, there's a cynical interpretation of why they don't, and there's a more charitable interpretation of why they don't, but I think they should advance more standalone bills, because I think if you put a health care bill up and it was just a simple expansion of Medicare, let's say the dental, vision, and hearing was a standalone package that Chuck Schumer brought to the floor, all the Democrats are going to support that. You really are going to have Republican senators filibustering for a very long time on not giving seniors dental, vision, and hearing care. I think that's going to be really tough for them, right? So I don't know why Democrats don't do that more, but I think that they should, because when you have a giant package, you can say, oh, it's $2.5 trillion. There's a whole bunch of stuff in it. We oppose some of it. If you take a very clearly popular policy and you advance it as a standalone, it's a lot harder for them to withstand that pressure.
Yeah, I feel like they did it more when Trump was in the White or the Oval Office, which I think lends more credence to the cynical interpretation of that.
I tend towards the more cynical interpretation. Like, I think Democratic leadership is fundamentally not on our side, and we need to force them if we want them to enact some of these policies, which is why I want progressives to take more hardline tactics rather than trying to persuade them, because my view is persuasion hasn't worked.
Yes, I go ahead, David.
And I just want to add something to that real quick because I also think as a movement, as progressive and specifically for me as as a socialist movement, I think it's really important publicly to make a distinction between the Democratic Party and like the things that we're doing, right? And when for the because people who don't follow politics closely, they don't know all of the kind of drama that's going on as much as people who spend a lot of time following these issues, and it's really harmful to tell people, for example, in 2020, this is the most important election of your life. The world's on fire. We need all this stuff done. And then you don't get the results on the other side. And then people not being able to make the distinction between, progressive, Democrats and socialist members of Congress, et cetera, and, your typical centrist Democrat, right? I think that's like, if you want to play that game within the Democratic Party, you actually have to be spending a lot of time making that distinction too, I think.
I 100% agree with that. I mean, knocking on doors in 2016 and 2020, I do think it is an underestimated reality from the political class that there are lots of people who will say, well, what does it matter? And they've got a point, right? Because they don't really see a huge difference in their everyday lives, depending on who's in office. There are changes that make a difference, but they're not big and bold and recognizable. And they don't make enough of a difference to materially change millions of people's lives in the way that socialists want to. And so I think you're absolutely right. Like, we have to be clear that the Democratic Party, as it has been over the past, however many decades, does not represent what social justice advocates want. And if social justice advocates take power, we're going to actually make the real meaningful change that's going to dramatically change your experience when you get sick and have to go to the hospital.
One final thing, at least for me, there's been a lot of acrimony around certain strategy discussions, and I liked your message on how we can. There's a line between calling them frauds versus saying they need to actually grow a backbone and figure out how to exercise power. Give us your broad brushstrokes on that.
Yeah, so I mean, in the discussion around forcing the vote on Medicare for All, thinking about movements like the March for Medicare for All, I think there are really two very important components of what those things have highlighted. One is this thing about progressives having power, and they do need to be accountable to using it, and we should pressure them to use it and vigorously debate strategy with them when it seems like they are appeasing power more than challenging it. Because I do think when you're in a position of leadership, there's tons of pressure all the time to compromise. You can be a really good person who shares our values. Many Democrats are not, but there is a contingent in Congress who I believe are, but who is consistently hearing, this is the best you can get, this is the best you can get, and feels like they need to compromise. So I think it's really important for them to feel some pressure and be pushed. The other thing that I think is really important is, especially during something like a pandemic, it's really important to highlight what is the importance of having a healthcare system that actually works for people, and to be really clear and visible around making the case for that healthcare system. So I think we can do that without saying that, there's nobody in Congress who is aligned with us on some of our policy issues. I think we can be very hard on our friends in Congress, but also be cognizant of the fact that there are times where we do see them pushing, and what they really need is us to be pushing them hard and helping them push rather than making them more of kind of an outcast. So anyway, I'm all for people really strongly challenging even the people I would say are our best allies in Congress. I've criticized Bernie Sanders even during the campaign because I think it's really important to hold our friends accountable.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to draw a distinction between people who are on our side generally, like a Bernie Sanders is on most issues, versus people who are not, like a Joe Biden is.
Yeah, I kind of on a different topic you brought up that I want to get your perspective on with given all the family you have in healthcare, that healthcare system thing. Like we're talking about how to get people vaccinated. Do you have like I one suspicion I have, which maybe it's self-serving, is like people like are worried that I was surprised it didn't cost me anything. I was surprised like walking in even though I was assured it wasn't going to. Like just this sort of relationship with healthcare, I think is it's a perfect case in point.
Well, there's a lot of research too that does show that when you introduce cost sharing into healthcare, it just discourages people from getting needed care. And you're absolutely right. I mean, people don't trust it with our medical system because you're hit with surprise bills all the time. And it makes a lot of sense why you'd be skeptical that it's actually going to be free. But that is the way that it should work, right? I mean, you go to get your vaccine, you get your vaccine. It's in the interest of public health. It's how doctors want things to work, and it's how it should work. And it's crazy to me, you know, when, again, I worked in policy at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, the thing that would always drive me nuts is I'd have these conversations with Obama administration economists, and they'd insist that cost sharing was really necessary to prevent overutilization. Like healthcare is a regular good that people would buy tons of if they didn't have to pay for it. And I'm like, no, people don't want to go to the doctor, right? I mean, you may have very few fringe cases where they want to do that, but generally speaking, like, I don't want to go to the dentist. I go to the dentist so I can stay healthy. So I think there's just a fundamental misunderstanding in some policy circles of what the effects are of making people pay for care. They're not to prevent people from getting too much care. They're preventing people from getting the care they need.
Absolutely. Ben, where should people go to follow your work?
So you can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Ben Spielberg, and I blog on 34justice.com. As well. So feel free to go either of those places.
Well, thank you so much for your wisdom this evening. Yeah, he's a great follow. I think Ben's one of the best on this topic, so people should definitely go give him a follow. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great talking to you guys.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. He's great. I think he really like, you know, this seems like a hard line to sort of, or hard road to navigate, a Silem Charybdis, to use a Greek metaphor. But when you see certain people walking it very matter-of-factly like Ben does, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and it is amazing, like short of Medicare for All too, the amount of tools that are there that supposedly even line up with, you know, centrist or Bidenism, you know, rhetoric as to what they believe in, and their inability to implement them it is really frustrating when you start to put it forward that like this is what they were saying they were doing, this is what they said they were going to do. Here's a moment where they have the opportunity to do it, and there's not a lot of action on it. I think it's really important to understand those dynamics.
Yeah, and this is, yeah, I mean, we've touched on it, but this is why it was horrible for people to call him the next FDR so soon. Like, my thing was always, like, honestly, the reason to put Democrats in power is to show this shit so they can't pretend for 4 years, and we have to relearn it all over again. But I don't think it's surprising, this game that they're playing with this, the way, like, we see it everywhere. The good press release to basically, like, say, like, see Joe Biden better than Trump, and then it turns out, like, well, marginally, asterisk.